residents in Niger's capital have welcomed the arrival of military delegates from Mali and Burkina Faso the previous day in hopes that troops from the region's other junta-led states could help protect the leaders of Niger's recent coup from a potential show of force from other West African nations. Now, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, had told leaders of the July 26 coup to stand down by August 6 or face a possible military intervention. But the junta instead closed Niger's airspace and pledged to defend the country. ECOWAS defense chiefs agreed on Friday on a possible military action plan if the detained president Mohamed Bazoum was now released and reinstated, although they said operational decisions would be decided by heads of state. But the bloc's unity has been broken by a promise from the ruling juntas in Mali and Burkina Faso, both member states, to come to Niger's defense if needed. Well, let's get an update now from our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you so much for your time. Give us the latest then in as far as Niger is concerned. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, sanctions imposed. There's been a lot of, calls that those sanctions need to be relooked. Give us the latest in terms of relations between the West and especially as it relates to these sanctions.
Yeah, so the West has been paying close attention. We know that there has been an attempt by Victoria Nuland from the United States to meet Mohamed Bazoum, the deposed president. We know that Brussels and Paris in particular have been keeping close eye on what has been going on in the situation, especially France as the former colonial power. They will be monitoring that emergency summit held on Thursday in Nigeria. ECOWAS is going to be meeting again to decide on their next course of action, if it is going to be military incursion into Niger, if it's going to be stepping up of sanctions, if there's going to be another path. We know that the Nigerian Senate is recommending diplomacy and cautioning the government against going ahead with any military action. So that's the situation in terms of the West looking at what's happening with ECOWAS. France firmly standing behind the decisions taken by the Economic Community of West African States. So happy for them to take the lead. France does still have 1,500 soldiers inside Niger at the moment. They've been helping with the civilian evacuations which took place last week. The situation when it comes overall to France is that they will want to be making sure that they are backing up these sanctions. They do want to see the return of the democratically elected Mohamed Bazoum, and they don't want this coup to be successful. But for the moment, it does seem that the military junta in Niger is continuing to make moves and try to establish itself, try to legitimize itself, and we know that they have now appointed a prime minister.
I would imagine that the summit that is emanating from that will take place in Nigeria would be the one that they really look to find some form of a solution. But what about the reaction in terms of just Mali and Burkina Faso, sending its military and, of course, more countries from the Sahel hoping to join that? What fears then do they have in terms of just that kind of reaction?
Well, that was probably something on the minds of senators in Nigeria, the fact that the military leaders in Mali and Burkina Faso had said that if there is this military action in Niger, we would take that as a sign of a declaration of war against us. So France, very concerned overall in terms of the deterioration of its status in the region. It does have a very complicated history, we know, in that part of West Africa, the United Kingdom as well. Complicated history there with Ghana and Nigeria in particular. There's also been reaction in terms of Brussels with the closure of Nigerian airspace. Brussels Airlines, the big Belgian flag carrier, looking at possible rerouting, perhaps having to add in refueling stops or longer flights for passengers if it is routing itself around Niger, because a lot of the big trips that come down to South Africa, for example, British Airways from the UK, KLM from the Netherlands, Air France from here in France, often take them down from Europe over the Med, over Algeria, then down over Niger, and then over Nigeria before they continue their journey, skirting down past Angola into South Africa. So some of them might have to look at rerouting those journeys if the closure of Nigerian airspace continues.
And as we wrap up, just Ross, just in terms of concern concerns around these anti-French demonstrations that we are seeing and hearing of, and of course the possible return of Wagner in the region?
Well, Antony Blinken, the United States Secretary of State, has said that that is what's happening, that Wagner are taking advantage of the instability in Niger to try to embed themselves, further continuing moves by the Russian paramilitary group after their failed rebellion inside Russia with Yevgeny Prigozhin. And we do understand now that they are trying to set themselves up in Belarus, but the African operations of Wagner are continuing. They've already been well established in the Central African Republic, for example, trying to aid different factions in different ways. They often control mines, control a lot of the finances, and trying to take a cut of some of the resources in these different countries, but also providing those countries that want to engage with Wagner with a different perspective. We have seen a lot of Russian flags. We have seen a lot of French flags being burnt. We have seen a lot of pro-Russian placards, and we have seen a lot of anti-France placards in recent days in Niamey, the Nigerian capital. So that is also something in the context of the war in Ukraine and Russia's position there in Europe, with Wagner fighting in the war in Ukraine against the Western-backed Ukrainian forces. That is something that is on the minds of people in Washington, Paris, London, Berlin and Brussels as well, the incursions by Wagner Group into different West African states.